And we're back once more again. That's the way that phrase goes. Once more again, we are back for GPS Live for the week of August 16th, 2024. Thank you so much for joining us if you are here live. And if you are watching this on demand, thank you again for your time. We would love to hear from you guys, where you're watching from, where you're tuning in from, and any of your thoughts on the stories that we're about to cover. Speaking of stories, that's what we do on this show. We talk about news stories that we have found. And speaking of I'm Tristan Morris.
And I'm Jonathan Singer. Tristan, how are you doing?
I'm doing really well. I don't think I've ever done the intro to a show fully in reverse before. But yeah, that's a new thing I can put into my book of things that I've done, I guess. I don't know where I'm going with that. I'm doing great. How are you doing?
I'm doing really well. I'll tell you what, we were off air last week because it was the big Hacker Summer Camp conference series, right? If you were attending Black Hat, B-Sides Las Vegas, or DEF CON, we'd love to hear about your experience down in the comments. I sadly did not make it this year, but I'm usually a regular in those places. So hope to see everybody next year. And if you see me wandering the con halls, please be sure to say hi. But overall, lots of crazy stuff was talked about out there in Vegas. And we hope that everybody who attended made it back safely, had a good time, and look forward to hearing about the epic hacks and the elite stories.
All of the epic research that comes out of there and all of the great things. And that actually sounds like a really great opinion, right? That we wish everyone safe travels and that they had a good time and all that. This sounds like a great opinion that GuidePoint Security can really fully get behind. But before we continue with other things that we might talk about, we do need to say that the views and opinions that are expressed by Jonathan and I on this show do not necessarily reflect the views and opinions of GuidePoint Security. These are just our own things that we are saying. Like I said, I feel like that's probably a pretty safe one. But after this, we're going to talk about news stories that we found interesting this week. And we want to make sure that everyone knows that like any companies that we mention, anything like that is strictly in conjunction with the fact that these are news stories. And it is not GuidePoint's opinion one way or the other. Unless we're talking about like cybersecurity standards that everyone can get behind, like multi-factor all the things. So with that, we've got some great interesting stories that we found this week lined up. Let's just go ahead and dive right into our first one, which comes to us from Bleeping Computer. And Jonathan, I believe you had found a second source for this as well, right? From Dark Reading.
Yep.
Yes. So these stories are coming to us from Bleeping Computer and Dark Reading about NIST releasing 3 new post-quantum standards and guidance on implementing those encryption standards. So Jonathan, take it away, and I'll post these links in the comments.
Sure thing. So as everybody's aware, quantum computing is here today, and it's continuing to grow. It seems like with new research constantly. One of the big challenges with quantum computing is the ability to perform these crazy mathematical functions in a fraction of the time of modern technology. Remember, quantum computing is doing some crazy things with qubits and being multi-positioned. And the idea here is, well, encryption, isn't that just a bunch of math also? And that is correct. And that brings us to the challenge of modern encryption and the ability to break it with quantum computers. Now, thankfully, there's been so many fantastic competitions and research. We've talked about it here on the show about how we need to start moving in the direction of quantum resistant algorithms, things that just because you're a quantum computer doesn't mean you magically have the ability to really overcome some of these new encryption methods. We still posting?
Thank you so much. I sneezed and I wanted to make sure that didn't make its way in. So the importance of this, like you were just saying, right? For decades now, we have operated on a set of encryption standards that have become just ubiquitous everywhere, right? And in the last few years, we've even seen a lot of those standards what's the word? I mean, taken out to pasture, essentially, right? Like there are older standards that just they were perfectly fine for the level of computing power that we had back then. And then as things have progressed, they've gradually been sunset and replaced with newer, more modern encryption standards. But quantum computing introduces an entirely new problem to this, with the amount of power and processing that it can bring into this. And so it's actually, I think, going to fundamentally shift cybersecurity in some very important ways as these come out. And so what NIST is urging for here is saying, like, hey, we now have these post quantum standards, and it's
Yep.
very interesting too, because a lot of this is still somewhat operating in the realm of theory, right?
Yes. Yes.
So saying, like, we have these algorithms that are our best attempts at being post quantum capable, and so they are urging everyone to start moving and shifting towards this and becoming agile in that approach, because any day now, right, an actual usable real quantum computer is going to hit mass market, right? And that's not even speaking for like research level stuff and kind of projects that are run by nation states or anything like that are probably already working in this area. But mass market availability of quantum compute is coming probably sooner than any of us are really thinking. The same thing just happened with, you know, the turns of generative AI, right? We went from that's a fantasy to we now have to educate our parents about counting fingers and photographs to make sure that they're not getting duped by something, right? Like, that happened so quickly. Quantum is going to have the same thing any day now. And so NIST is urging, with these 3 new standards, hey, please start adopting these now.
I must say that the Will Smith spaghetti video has come a long way for those that know. But
Yes.
to kind of lay out the groundwork here, initially there were about 82 different algorithmic candidates that were presented to NIST, with NIST selecting 4 of them back in 2022. And keep in mind, this quantum challenge has been around for over a decade. It's definitely a race. With that in mind, more recently, as of this week, NIST released the first 3 standards in draft form, and said that that 4th one that they selected will be coming out later this year. Now, for those playing along at home, you can look up FIPS 203, FIPS 204, and FIPS 205 to highlight what's called Crystals Kyber, Crystals Dilithium, and Sphinx Plus, all being currently proposed as part of these initial drafts. And this is really, like you said, setting a precedence around the direction we're going in. I mean, remember, modern SSL TLS is using encryption that has the potential of being cracked with quantum. Look at cryptocurrencies, my favorite topic in the whole world. Certain ones have the potential, right? Legacy things. Everything today is pretty much based off of some form of RSA or AES. And that is where we need to really focus our energy. And so this does kind of segue into what you're mentioning. Are companies starting to realize that this is on the horizon? Are you hearing the alarm that you're urged to start your post-quantum cryptography journey, is what they're saying. And we're already seeing a number of companies out there that are doing things with this. For instance, a number of really popular brands, Google, Signal, Apple, Zoom, have already implemented NIST approved post-quantum encryption standards in their tools, right? I think we ran a story on how Zoom is starting to do this now. And so company XYZ, what are you doing to combat this too?
Yeah, and I think another really important approach to this too is going to be the fact that across your organization, right, you are not, encryption is not a thing that you choose the standard you're going to use for your organization and you use that on everything, right? Encryption is determined by the tools that you're using, the processes that they go through, and how those tools and programs are built. So you probably have multiple versions or multiple different encryption standards at use in your organization today. And so, like, cataloging those and starting to build that out so that you can focus on the ones that are closest to being vulnerable, being able to understand which things are most likely to kind of be targeted first if someone were to try and leverage quantum computing to crack all of these, and being able to inventory that and start working through that list is going to be a really key step in all of this, and in implementing these. And if you're an organization that is on the kind of consumption side, right, of this, it's going to be incredibly important to look at the vendors that you're using, the third-party vendors, and say like, hey, are they implementing encryption standards that are going to be that are going to continue to protect my and my customers' information as we transmit it to them and as we work with it with them? Because you may not have something directly in your environment where you are implementing encryption, but I guarantee you are using tools that are.
Yeah, and that actually brings us, we do have a question real quickly from the audience, is regarding the ethical implications of quantum computing, especially when it comes to privacy and data protection. Just like you said, it is going to essentially break privacy and break data protection through the use of quantum computing to essentially dissolve the current non-quantum resistant standards. And so that hopefully addresses that question. But we do have a lot to cover in today's news. So without further ado, Tristan, you want to take us into our next story?
Yeah, let's jump into the next story. I see you passing this one off to me, Jonathan, knowing that I'm a Google Pixel user.
I know,
No,
I was going to say, I'm
great.
happy over here with my iPhone and its own issues, but this one applies to you.
Yeah, no, this one is fantastic. And so this story is coming to us from, Ben, producer Ben is on VTO for a wedding this week, and so we're scrambling on the back end to be like, oh, we got to post the comments, we got to find the stories. But this one in particular, this is coming from the Hacker News. For the last 7 years, since September of 2017, Google Pixel devices, those are phones and other devices that are made directly by Google, running the Android platform, since September 2017, have been shipping with an incredibly vulnerable application baked into the firmware. And that puts all of those phones at risk of not only configuration changes, but also potentially remote code execution. So what's happening here, to give you the rundown on this, Jonathan, is that if you take a step back and look at just the cell phone industry as a whole, the cellular industry as a whole, for a very long time, AT&T was the only carrier of the iPhone, right? They were the only partner that held it. And that was due to some exclusivity deals that they had built with Apple, because they said, look at the customer base that we have and we can market this. And then as the iPhone got more popular, it started going out to these other platforms, or to these other vendors. Vendors, cell phone signal providers, carry an enormous amount of weight and influence within the entire cell phone industry, and they can say, in a very kind of like collective bargaining, I guess, almost, right, is the fact that Verizon, for example, can say, look at our hundreds of millions of subscribers that we have. If you don't do X with your phone, we're just not going to carry it. And when you're looking at something as large as like the Google Pixel brand or like the iPhone, Google and Apple are very much beholden to say, okay, well, we will do that. And so what happened with this is that Verizon essentially created an application for the demo mode of the phone, for the showcase mode of the phone. And I want to say that this is probably, I think this is just the retail mode that you would see in a store. So if you go pick up the phone in a store, the kind of like demonstration screens that are up, that's what this application is designed to do. So they built this application and then gave it to Google and said, this has to be in Pixel phones so that we can run our demo mode. And so it was put in directly inside the Android firmware. But the problem is it has this massive list of permissions that it has on the phone so that they can do everything they want to do in the retail mode. I mean, if you look at this, I think it's over 3 dozen permissions, but you're looking at things like accessing fine location data, Bluetooth admin privileges, modifying things like network settings, installing packages, running packages on the phone, setting things like task priority, running in the foreground, like all of these types of things that are really core aspects of a phone that only applications that you really trust should be accessing in total, like especially all together. And Verizon required this to be part of Android in order to carry Pixel phones. So since September of 2017, every Pixel phone has shipped with this application baked in.
Now, it's a lot more than just, oh, great, I can turn on demo mode, because the trick with this one is the way that this app was communicating online. More specifically, how it was using an unencrypted, so it doesn't even matter if it's quantum, connection to a very specific host. That host happens to be some AWS instance on the internet. And the challenge becomes is, well, if you're connected to maybe like a Wi-Fi network, well, then that host can be spoofed. A different configuration file could be hosted, and your phone is going to simply download that configuration as if it was the appropriate one, since there's no way to authenticate or verify like a certificate. And then now we have what the researchers are saying, the ability to not just change the configuration of that particular demo mode app, but also run code and execute programs on the device. So this has been sitting dormant, calling out to this host, the server in AWS, pulling down a configuration file and then making a decision based on that. Keep in mind, as Tristan, as you mentioned, this is part of the firmware. What that means is that it's installed and runs at a system level, and it cannot be uninstalled at the user level. So this is like one of those bloatware kind of concepts that's just shoved into the device. There's no way for you to get rid of it. There's no way for you. I mean, obviously, if you root your device, it's completely different. But most users are not rooting to remove some of these, or they're not flashing aftermarket firmware. This is just one of those carrier apps that's built in.
And that's actually one of the kind of the interesting things about this story, right? Is that pre-2017, right? We were already learning the lesson about baked in bloatware carrier apps, right? Like there was a period of time post the Motorola Droid, right? The first really big Android phone. And then HTC became a really big name. And you had this through, the 2010s, the early 2010s, the fact that you could not go buy a phone at a carrier that didn't have like the ESPN app pre-installed on it, and it was unremovable, right? Like you could not get rid of it no matter what you did unless you rooted your phone. And so there was a time where like more and more bloatware was shipping with Android devices, and then you had this shift to like people wanted clean Android, and that's where
vanilla Android, right?
Vanilla Android, right? And that's where Pixel devices came from. Was that like, hey, we'll give you the pure experience. Samsung also started shipping that way, and so, but through that period of time, so many of those applications that were shipping were found to be incredibly vulnerable, and that was one of the things that led to the push to say, hey, we don't want this on our phone anymore. We're not controlling it. It's asking for permissions that we don't want. And so that lesson was already being learned. And here we have, again, a thing that cannot be removed. It's baked in now. It's not active necessarily on every phone that you buy, but it is available. Mm-hmm. And so if someone were able to remotely enable this or gain access to your device physically and enable this application, then they could start, adversary in the middle on this one, pushing configuration files, pushing down malware to your phone and having it run in real time. And so we have another great comment actually coming in from LinkedIn. Does the vulnerability highlight any broader concerns about the security of carrier-specific software on Android devices? And that's exactly what that is, right? So the carrier-specific concerns about this malware and looking at the amounts of control. And again, this actually goes back to data privacy, right? Data security and data privacy. You are putting a ton of data on your phone, on your device. And the fact that carriers have the ability to just say, hey, phone manufacturer, put this thing on there that bypasses a lot of security controls. I mean, one of the key things that this actually has is the ability to kill background processes. Yeah. Right. So this application is set up as a retail demo mode so that if you go into the store, download Candy Crush right onto a demo phone and then leave it running, it's designed so that it can kill any background process that's running that wasn't part of this kind of baked in list. But what that means is, if you are paying for cybersecurity tools for your phone, right, this app has the ability to go in and kill that background process, right? So if you're paying for, whatever mobile-based security you might be, it can go in and remove that. And so there are broader concerns here with the level of access that these things have, not only to your data, but to the control over your device.
Now, one of the things I do want to point out is from the researchers directly that this app isn't necessarily enabled by default, but it's very trivial to just go in and enable the app. So if somebody were to have control over your device and enable this app, one of the first kind of thoughts that comes into my head about how this exploit would be potentially used is, let's say you're visiting a foreign country that's considered an adversary of ours. Well, when you connect to the cellular network, things may feel normal, but we've seen this with over-the-air updates. Well, what if they just spoof the hosting configuration file and simply just push it down to all the devices that are foreign to that country, and therefore now installing backdoor? So definitely a good find. It's definitely troubling, but it just goes to show that while it may seem useful at the time, a lot of this bloatware, a lot of these additional things, a lot of these, I mean, we ran stories about how DRM was backdoored malware also on PCs, and the intention is good, but the execution tends to have its flaws.
Yeah. So speaking of remote code execution over network connections, that's actually going to lead us to our next story, which I'm going to put in your capable hands, Jonathan. Why don't you take us away with our next story here?
Sure. So this one, coming to us from both Bleeping Computer and more specifically the Register, is about a new Windows TCP/IP remote code execution vulnerability impacting all systems with IPv6 enabled. Now, I know that many people are still living in an IPv4 world, but many are moving to IPv6, especially because it's been around for quite a while. It's not necessarily new. And this particular vulnerability is definitely being dubbed an ODate through researchers and submitted with Microsoft. But it's also part of a bigger story here, where this has been one heck of a Patch Tuesday, touting 10 different 0 days being addressed here. This particular one, as you mentioned, is a 0-click wormable remote code execution hole found in Windows, and requires zero authentication and is done simply by having IPv6 enabled.
Yeah. So that is actually it's an interesting kind of twist on the route that this is taking, right? Because it's been years now that IPv6 has been like being the growing as the new standard, right? So we're still coming into this age when that is going to be the only thing that is used, but it has been recommended for a very long time. Yeah, leave this enabled because tools are starting to use it, platforms are starting to use it, and so just the fact that this is enabled at all on a machine allows this remote code execution vulnerability to be exploited. There is something really interesting in here, a really interesting quote in the Bleeping Computer article. The security researcher who found this actually said, like, hey, considering how harmful this is, I am not going to disclose more details in the short term. He added that blocking IPv6 on a local Windows firewall will not stop the exploit because the vulnerability is triggered prior to it being processed by the firewall, which is a really interesting, like the fact that this cannot be blocked really at the device level. This is something your entire network needs to be accounting for.
Yeah, one thing also called out from the Bleeping Computer article is you can disable IPv6 to prevent this exploit, but IPv6 is enabled by default on just about everything. And that just goes to show that any of these devices that are actively connected and networked today are very likely to be vulnerable unless you've already done the proactive work of disabling IPv6. I'll say that I use IPv6 here at home in my internal network, and I know a lot of businesses and carriers are moving in that direction given the sparse amount of publicly addressable IPv4 space. And so just imagine the number of Windows devices that are connected to the broader internet with this. But again, this is part of a large number of patches that are going out, 90 in total. Like I said, 10 of them are RCEs, a couple hitting stuff like Office tools, some other scripting engines, other drivers, and WinSock. But definitely please be sure to make sure that you are updating actively this week. Although it has been stated that this particular vulnerability has not been addressed in a while, there are other ones that of the top 10 that are being seen in the wild. So, and
it's going to be also incredibly vital because to apply these patches, because they say, like, hey, while you can disable IPv6 if you can't enable the patch on their support website, right? Microsoft does note that IPv6 is a mandatory part of Windows Vista and Server 2008 and newer versions, right?
Vista.
Back to Vista in 2008, it's a mandatory piece of it. And so toggling
Yeah.
that, turning that off could break critical core components. But again, LinkedIn user, we have a great question here. What potential attack vectors could malicious actors exploit using this vulnerability? So Jonathan, you dove a little bit deeper into the technical aspects of this. So I'll leave that question to you to speculate on.
But from a bingo card perspective, if you were highlighting integer underflow, then that was correct. But basically, by simply sending a crafted packet to a system that is running IPv6, which in most cases is on by default, you will have the ability to execute arbitrary code to take over that host. It is game over at that point. And so it is considered one of the most critical types of vulnerabilities out there. Zero-click RCE, that just basically means no participation required. So yes.
So yes, multiple multiple problems highlighted here.
But let's round out.
Oh yeah, we'll find out in the future exactly how bad this could be, I guess. But we have a couple minutes left here, and we always want to end on some good news stories. And so that brings us to our final story that we want to talk about. Not really the final thing that we want to talk about, but the final story that we want to talk about today. Which is the fact that in Spain, the mastermind behind the group Reviton was arrested and has been extradited to the U.S. And so, after a many years long chase, the bad threat actor known as J.P. Morgan has been arrested and extradited to the United States.
Yeah, and as all good news, we always like to see when particular members of ransomware or developers are taken down. This particular one, Ransom Cartel, is a ransomware operation that kind of came to the scene back in 2021. But one of the key details here is they have a very extensive code similarity with the REvil family, one of the different bits of ransomware that we've talked about here on the show. And so this particular individual administered the ransom cartel, managing that ransomware as a service operation, and also recruiting other cyber criminals from online forums to participate in the attacks.
Yeah, so we've seen the growth, and you can go look at almost all of the grit reports from the last year at GuidePoint Security, right? The GuidePoint Research and Intelligence team, and the reports that they put out monthly, and the roundup reports they put out quarterly and annually, talking about the rise of ransomware as a service and this service-based model of large ransomware groups with very entrenched ransomware tactics and software, renting that out, right, to affiliates. And so Maxim Silnikow, the suspected leader of the ransomware group, Reviton, and he went by the alias JP Morgan, was tracked by the National Crime Agency and parallel investigations running through the Secret Service and the FBI, and was tracked down, and they were able to figure out who was behind this online alias of JP Morgan, pass that off to authorities in Spain, who have arrested him and extradited him to the U.S. for a trial and sentencing. And this is great. We love seeing these wins for the cybersecurity community, especially given the fact that right, this group has been very prolific in its targeting. And would like take over systems, imply through the warning message that they put up that it had been seized by like government authorities. So we can go ahead and tack on impersonating a federal agent onto the list of charges, I'm sure. And then, say it had been taken over by authorities and threaten the people with saying like, oh, the authorities found out that you were downloading illegal content. And illicit materials, and so collected over $400,000 a month from people for this. So this is a huge takedown for that, for this group, and a huge win for cybersecurity.
Yeah, well, that does take us to the top of the hour. We did have one more story that was about the 2.7 billion records that are currently being leaked. But
yeah, we were gonna talk about freezing your credit report and multi-factoring all the things.
Yeah, and MFA everything.
Yeah.
But we do have some interesting news. This kind of does bring us actually to a conclusion of season one.
Season one of GPS Live.
This kind of started as an experiment. We really enjoy interacting with all of our viewers, our followers online, our commenters, and we want to keep that tradition going. But we're going to be taking a couple months off. We've got exciting things going on in my life over here, as does Tristan, and so we're not done. The show's not over. We're just taking a little bit of a break. So we hope to see you again soon for GPS Live Season 2 in a couple months. Be on the lookout for planning. We love you too. Thank you, LinkedIn users out there. That's what I wanted to say. So
yeah. So we'll be taking a break for a bit, restructuring a little bit on the show end, and figuring out how best to deliver this moving forward. As Jonathan takes a break from everything and comes back refreshed. So fret not. GPS Live will return to give you your regularly scheduled updates on cybersecurity news and goofy antics. But until then, I have been and will continue to be Tristan Morris.
And I am Jonathan Singer.
And we will see you next time. But until then, multi-factor all of them. Multi-factor authentication on everything. Just do it. Just put it on there.
Yes.
I'll see you, Jonathan.
Bye.